Okay, it's 2 o'clock, so I suggest that we start. So welcome all to the July edition of the GLO Virtual Seminar Series. We are very happy today to have Claudia Senik here presenting a super nice paper that I saw her presenting in Bonn in December, and I thought this would make a really great seminar presentation. I would like to ask you if you have questions. So she's happy to take questions along the way. If you have a question, just unmute yourself and ask the question. I think this works best. We have until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock sharp, we are going to finish this presentation. But now, Claudia, the floor is yours. I will not take too much time away from your presentation.
Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. And I'll share the screen. I hope everybody sees correctly. Okay, so this is a joint paper with Natalia Dancer, who is professor at Freie University in Berlin, our joint PhD student Piotr Laris, and Rachel Cranton, who is the founder of maybe the economics of identity. So it's about gender identity, gender norms, and happiness. And I guess, okay, I can't go down. Okay. So the question that we ask here is about the relationship between gender norms and happiness. So the framework is that identity is about knowing who you are as opposed to what you are not, and more precisely what group you belong in versus not. So you have a group of people, and suddenly immediately people start to differentiate. Some decide that they are blue, the others are red, and they start differentiating on the basis of maybe their traits and also in terms of their behavior. So identity is related with differences in self-perception and differences in characteristics and behaviors. And with identity, with the idea that I belong to this group or that group, some prescriptions arrive telling you how you should look and what you should do. So the question is, depending on what we are talking about, is this differentiation horizontal or vertical? Meaning that in terms of well-being, for instance, is it neutral to be blue or red, to be a man or a woman, to be a blue collar or white collar, to be a pianist or a cellist, a cello player? By horizontality, we mean that it's neutral. You can be you can be a woman and do pink collar jobs. You can be a man and do math. But if this reflects tastes and preferences and everybody is equally happy with that, then there's no reason to worry about that. And this differentiation is horizontal, meaning that it's not particularly correlated with a higher or lower utility or here well-being. By contrast, we would think that this gender norms and the differentiation that comes with it is vertical if the content of the norm, the prescriptions that come with the norm, are associated with different levels of utility. Here we interpret utility as well-being. So this is what we ask. My personal motivation for this paper is that I wrote a small series of papers about the persistence of the typically post-socialist gender culture. During the socialist period, women were working full-time. They were as educated as men. They were doing math, engineering, etc. So in terms of educational choices and on the labor market, the gender gap was very small in Central and Eastern European countries as compared with Western counterparts. So I wrote some papers with my former students and co-author Quentin Lippmann, looking at the difference between East Germany and West Germany, even today, in terms of what women do and the gender gap in math between boys and girls, East Germany versus West Germany. So and also I wrote a paper with Naomi Friedman, because I see that this man is here, looking at what Russian girls who arrived as babies in Israel were doing in terms of tertiary field choice and also labor market behavior. So there is persistence, and we can see that depending on institutions, women can do exactly the same thing as men. It's possible. And then at the end of the seminar, someone asked the question, okay, so what? Are they happier if they do math? Are women going to be happier if they do what men do? And the answer at that time was, I don't know. So this is what drove me to look at this data and write this paper, to have an answer to this question. So this question translates into the one that is written here as this differentiation, for instance, in terms of educational choices and labor market behavior. Are the choices horizontal or vertical. Okay, so it's unusual to present this way, but I have more freedom now in my career. So just to be clear, so the framework that we have in mind is not a model, it's just a framework, is the relationship between identity, behavior, and utility. It's the Akerlof and Cranton model of the economics of identity. So think of a person I don't know if you can see the mouse here. Yeah, think of a person I who's going to enjoy a level of utility W. Depending on her actions, AI, on her characteristics, epsilon I, such as being tall or skilled or funny or whatever, the category in which she belongs, for instance, here being a man or a woman, and the norms that come with belonging in that category in terms of the epsilon and the A. So the norms, the expectations that society nourishes, depending on whether you are in the man or a woman category, in terms of how you should look and what you should do. So this utility can be decomposed in two parts, the very traditional mainstream part and the identity utility part. The mainstream part is the usual one, so you choose to do this or that, you choose to work or not, how many hours, what you do, etc. And then this leads you to a certain level of identity, of utility, so pi here, and also your characteristics, your given characteristics, such as being smart or not, for instance, will make you reach a certain level of utility. This is completely standard. Now, the identity utility part is the fact that your behavior, your traits, depending on the category you belong in and the norms that come with it, are going to produce a certain level of identity utility. This is the non-traditional part. And this identity utility itself can be decomposed into parts, maybe. One is the fact of, what identity is supposed to do. So I know that I belong in this category N, and if I feel that the more I feel that I belong, the happier I am, the higher utility I have. This is what identity is meant for. So this is the SI, the identity utility. The utility depending on the intensity of your identity. So it depends on a function of all these things. So in what category I am, man or woman, how I look, what I do, and the prescriptions associated with my category. So maybe it depends on that, but maybe it depends on something else. We don't know what it depends on. And then there is this term, which is utility, the non-standard identity utility. So depending on what category, what group I belong in, see the norms that come with it, how I look and what I do. There are two sources of utility. One is, I know what is expected from me. If I do so, I feel good because I feel that I conform, and I also have internalized the way other people look at me. So if I feel that I'm doing what is expected from me, I feel good. This is just the utility from conforming or not conforming. But then there is also a content of the norm. So maybe you could be happy to abide by what is expected by the norm, but it could be also unpleasant or leading to lower or higher utility depending on the content. For instance, if you are a woman in a traditional country and what is expected from you is to be a housewife, if you are a housewife, you can feel that you're doing what is expected, so you feel good. But on the other hand, being a housewife, maybe you are bored, depressed, you don't know what you're doing with your time, you don't have autonomy, so the content of the norm is not so nice. So maybe there is a trade-off in terms of conforming to the norm and the content of the norm. So this is why the sign of this term can be ambiguous. Okay? Don't hesitate to interrupt. Okay, so we have this framework, and so what do we know about pi, about UI, about SI? So what do we know about gender norms here, the N? What do we know about the psi, so subjective gender identity, how much I feel that I'm part of this group? For instance, if I'm a woman, how feminine do I feel? And the relationship with the different parts of the utility function. So, as you know, I guess, we know an awful lot about gender norms. There are so many papers about, gender gaps in education, behavior, women shy from competition, women are more compassionate. This comes from intrinsic characteristics, maybe it's role models, etc. So it's out of question to summarize what we know about gender norms, but fortunately, there is a recent paper by Cortez, by these guys here, NBER 2026 about gender norms and the labor market. So I can refer you to this working paper. There is a recent paper also about gender stereotype threat, showing that when people have in mind what is expected from the stereotype for their gender, they are going to be influenced by this stereotype, even if, and then they are going to to make decisions in order to conform. And there is another recent paper by Burstein, Kapellen, Tungoden, and Voena and Yanagisawa-Droth, showing, as you know, the usual paper by Burstein, showing that people have first-order beliefs, so what they believe, and also second-order beliefs, so what they believe that people believe about whether it's okay for a woman to work, whether it's okay for this kind of things, and showing that there is a mismatch, of course, between what people believe and what people really believe in general, and what individuals think that others believe, and this is correlated with their choices and behavior.
Claudia,
okay, so
may I ask something? Is it important that AI does not affect epsilon I? So is it
no,
my actions cannot affect my because I think that my actions, for example, studying, might affect how smart I am. Or is it?
Yeah, so this is, no, actually, so here, this is why I said it's a very good question. This is why I said that it's just a framework, because actually relationships can flow in any direction. Maybe indeed, usually we tend to differentiate things that we don't have an action on, like epsilon, and things that we depend on our will. But you're right, if you start learning math, maybe you would become more skilled. So, and also maybe how much you feel you are feminine will depend on what you do in terms of what you learn and what job you have, and maybe also what you do will influence how much feminine you are. So the arrows of causality go in all possible directions, and we'll see in the analysis whether there is some clue that it's more one direction or another. But a priori, it's just a framework to just set the elements of the picture.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so then what do we know about psi? So measures of a gender identity. The most traditional way to go with that is, for instance, the Sandra Bem's sex role inventories. This is really a collection of stereotypes about what women are, what women do and how they look, and what men do and how they look. This is based on large surveys, asking a large sample of the population, do you think this behavior or trait is more masculine or feminine, etc. And then you identify the list of things that you think are typically male or typically female or none. And then you decide once and for all that this is what masculine means, this is what feminine means. And then when you run a survey, for instance, you can ask people, are you more competitive? Are you more compassionate? Are you more this or that? And then you will decide whether these persons are more or less feminine. I can show you the list. This is Sandra Bem's sex role inventory. So masculine items here, feminine items here, and items which are neither feminine nor masculine. So you can see masculine items, leader, aggressive, ambitious, etc., self-reliant, risk-taking. Feminine is affectionate, cheerful, loves children, Okay. The other way to go about SI of psi is to ask people directly how feminine or masculine they feel without any preconceptions about what it means. Maybe people have these stereotypes in mind. Maybe it's about something completely different. Maybe it's about I don't know, the way they interact with people. Maybe it's about maternity or paternity. Maybe it's about sexuality. We don't know. So this is really new. There are two papers by this group, Breno, Hersen, Ranhill, and Weber, using a one scale. How feminine or masculine do you feel? So feminine, very feminine on the 0, very masculine on the 6 or on the 10, and then you place yourself. Or otherwise, you can use two scales. So one scale for femininity, one scale for masculinity, and each person, whether man or woman, is going to give oneself a score of femininity and masculinity. This is what we have in the data. So then about subjective well-being and gender identities, there is a small series of papers about gender gaps in happiness. So are women happier than men or less happy in terms of subjective well-being? It's not conclusive. There are very few papers on gender gap in job satisfaction showing that women are more satisfied with their job than men when they occupy the same type of job. There's a small series of papers about gender division of labor and happiness, and one paper about gender identity and subjective well-being, which is interesting. Okay, so what do we do here? We use the European Social Survey, which, as you know, has a regular questionnaire every other year, and then some additional rotate modules that researchers can propose. It's like a bid, and if you win, you can introduce your question. So some researchers, I don't know who it was, introduced in 2024 these questions about gender identity. So first, each person is asked which of the options on this card best describes you? I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm other. And then each person is asked, as I told you, how masculine would you say you feel, and how feminine would you say you feel? And in the data, there are 119 other questions, variables about individual behavior, choices, and traits, and life satisfaction on the 0-10 scale, which is the usual variable that we use in happiness economics to proxy, to proxy utility. So how satisfied are you with your life on the 0-10 scale? And there are also other objective measures, also some other well-being measures, such as how happy are you, and also yesterday, did you feel depressed, anxious, angry, relaxed, etc. I can show the descriptive statistics if you want, but maybe not. Okay. So in the countries, we have 31 countries for a total of 50,000 observations. As you see, there is Nordic countries, Southern countries, Central and Eastern European countries, and Western countries, all in Europe. And this is the distribution of the variable. Because it's the first time that we see these variables, still interesting to look at the descriptive. So as you see, a lot of people a lot of men feel quite masculine, and a lot of women feel quite feminine. The average score for men is 5.2 on the 0-6 scale, which is quite high, and the average score for women is 5.11. But as we see, far from everybody is really polar, so not everybody is a 6 on their own sex, let's say. There is overlap. So men can feel, maybe if I'm a man, I'm a 5 on the masculinity scale, but I can also be a 3 on the femininity scale. And if I'm a woman, I can be a 5 on the femininity scale, but I can also be a 3 on the masculinity scale. This is why there is overlap. There is this violin color. So this shows, like in the paper by Breno et al., that this question adds a little bit more information than just the dual, are you a man or a woman? They show that. So now in terms of gender norms, we don't have the norms. We don't have the norms in terms of the prescriptive norms in the data. What we have in the data is a descriptive norm, meaning the typical things that men and women do in Europe. And so we are going to construct the typical behavior and traits for men and women in Europe. You can say it's not a norm because it's just descriptive, but a norm is a norm if it's applied by people. If you can say there's a norm of walking only on one foot, but if nobody does that, it's not a norm. The prescriptive norm has to be matched to a certain degree, at least, by the descriptive norm. If not, the normative norm will disappear. So what we do? So first, we screen all these 119 gender markers in order to see which ones are typically more typical of men or women. So statistically, we run a linear probability model of probability to be a man, depending on each of these variables, and we see which variables turn out to be more typically man or more typically typical of women, or which variables are not gender markers. So as a result, there are 53 variables. We just screen all the variables in the sample in a completely agnostic way. We have no prior about what should be a gender marker. So it turns out that 53 variables are statistically significant at 1% level. We retain these variables, we call them gender markers. Then, of course, we have to assign them a weight, because even if you have different gender markers, they are not necessarily all as important one as the other. Maybe some have a higher weight in the construction of the European stereotype. So we will calculate the weights, and then we will calculate individual typicality score which will be the distance of a person's own score on these gender markers compared to the average European score for women if I'm a woman, or for men if I'm a man. If my score as a woman is higher than the score of femininity of the typical European woman, I will say that I amplify the femininity score. If my score is less, I will say that I violate. So the question we ask is, how far is each person in the survey from the typical European man or woman, depending on what she is? So of course we standardize within gender, the gender markers within gender. And to give you an intuition of what we do, so suppose there is one trait which is a gender marker. So here it's the prevalence of this trait is higher for women. So let's say I don't know. Wearing pink or wearing lipstick. So women wear in average more lipstick than men. So if I'm a woman and my score of how often or I wear lipstick is higher than the typical score for women, I will be on that side. I will say that I amplify. If I wear less lipstick or no lipstick, I will say that I violate the female norm for lipstick. If I'm a man and I wear more lipstick than men, then I will go on that side, on the right. And here I will say that as a man, I violate. And if I wear even less lipsticks than other men, I will say that I amplify. So you see, it's not the same direction. So this is just for one trait, but the idea is that. So the the formulas are here. So we run this equation to identify the gender markers. Then we standardize these gender markers. Then we estimate the weights. We regress fact of being a man on each gender markers. We get a weight, and then this weight, the rho hat divided by the sum of the rho, gives the weight. So the weight for a woman is the opposite of the weight for a man. So for each individual, then we get this typicality score, this distance of each person's score to the average mu, the average score for the person in their own category. Okay, so as I told you, we say a person violates when her score is negative. So she's doing less, her score is less than the typical European score, and amplifies if her score is positive. Okay.
Can I ask you a very quick question? Because you did this for a European man and woman. Did you also consider doing it by country or by group of country? Because maybe, like the gender norms,
Exactly, yeah.
different. Yeah.
Very good. So we do it, as I will show you, we do it by region. So this east, west, south, north. We can also do it by country, but then, so we run the entire exercise by country. So identify the gender markers, etc. So it's in some countries it's not exactly the same gender markers. So it's sometimes it's not significant. It's less robust. But we do it by region, and we also do the leave one out country. We do the same exercise and we leave each one country at a time out to see if it's not driving the entire result. So in terms of putting connecting the framework with the data, so W will be measured by lab satisfaction. Psi will be measured by this subjective femininity or masculinity score, and utility from conforming to the norm is going to be measured by this deviation or amplification. And the sign is going to be ambiguous, because I told you there can be utility from abiding by the norm, but not necessarily from the content of the norm. So the result of the paper is here. Everything is here. Then it's going to be just estimates and robustness. So pairwise correlations of these variables. So if you're a man, the more you feel feminine, the less satisfied with your life you are. The more you feel masculine, the more satisfied you are. The more you violate, the less satisfied with your life. The more you amplify the typical masculinity score, the happier you are. So if you're a man, it's good to feel masculine, to do what men do, and not to deviate. If you're a woman, the more feminine you feel, the happier you are. The more masculine, the less happy. The more you violate the femininity standard, the happier you are. And the more you amplify, the less happy you are. So there is an asymmetry between men and women. Secret to happiness for women, as I told maybe in Bonn, feel feminine, but do what men do. In other words, mission impossible.
I think there is a question from, I mean, in general, for everybody, if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself, otherwise it becomes complicated.
Also,
Well,
we can see that we can look at the correlation between, maybe it goes back to your question, between, for instance, violation and feeling feminine. It's true that if you violate the feminine standard, you are going to, you are typically someone who feels less feminine. If you amplify, you feel more masculine, more feminine. So it's true that probably the arrows goes in both directions. This is why it's good to, we are going to run estimates.
Can I ask a bit what goes into, you said that it is very agnostic how you do this, but you still selected some traits and behaviors.
So we did not select, actually, we select the traits and behavior by testing each of them to see if they are correlated with the fact of being a man or a woman or not.
What I mean is, what is a behavior and what is a trait?
It's all the variables in the yeah. So I talked about behaviors and traits. So I will show you the domains. I will show you the labor market, the personality traits, the health behavior, etc. But in the first stage, what we do is take all the variables, 119 variables, and see which ones are gender markers. And then I will show you in a minute, after the main estimates, what these traits are exactly, what these traits and behaviors are by domain.
Yeah, thanks. Because that's a bit like, is earning a lot of money a male norm then?
Exactly, yeah. So there is, of course, this, we have the intuition that money is going to play a role, and it does. But it does not explain everything.
So, quick question. Do you test each of them, each trait individually, or do you put them all in at once and see what works?
Yeah, actually, we wondered about that, but we put them all in at once because otherwise, if it would give too much weight to things that are maybe just completely correlated. But anyway, after in the second time, we assigned the weights, but we put them all at once. So now we do the same. I'm showing you the same thing as an estimate. So we regress life satisfaction of individual A belonging in group G, so man or woman, depending on how much they feel feminine, feel masculine, violate the typical behavior for their group, or amplify it, controlling for some characteristics, not many, controlling just for the moment, controlling just for age, and country fixed effect, because otherwise all the other things could be potentially gender markers or what. So we are going to introduce them in the second stage, and just country fixed effects. So here are the results. It's the same as the correlations. So for men, if you're a man and you feel feminine, you're less happy. You feel masculine, you're more happy. You violate, you're less happy. You amplify, nothing, and I will show you why. And for women, if you feel feminine, you're more satisfied with your life. If you feel masculine, you are less. If you violate, you're happier. And if you amplify, you are more happy. It's interesting that you see, if you introduce these variables one by one or together, it doesn't change the magnitude of the coefficients. So it shows that it's not, the fact of violating, for instance, it is not completely explained by the fact that I feel less feminine, or conversely, the fact of feeling feminine is not completely explained by the fact, is here feminine, by the fact that I violate. So if we take this coefficient seriously and we want to draw the relationship between amplifying, violating, and life satisfaction, we can draw a graph like this with amplification. So here is the typical score for men or women. Here on this side you amplify, on that side you violate, and life satisfaction is on the y-axis. So for women, you see that the coefficients are the same. For violation and amplification, it's almost the same coefficient, 0.44, 0.46, just with the opposite sign. And same here. So for women, it's a line. It's just a linear relationship. So the more you violate, the higher your life satisfaction on the left side. The more you amplify, the lower your life satisfaction. For men, actually, if you violate compared with the average European behavior, you are going to be less satisfied. But if you amplify, the coefficient is not statistically significant, so it's not going to bring you additional happiness. This is interesting because when we run a completely non-parametric representation of the relationship, what we see here is that, so this is a typicality here on the x-axis as usual, and then the life satisfaction is locally weighted scatter plot smoothed. So for women, as we saw, there's the more you amplify, the less happy you are. But for men, it's not like that. So if you violate, you're less happy. If you're a standard here, you're happy. Then if you amplify a little bit, it does not bring you additional satisfaction. You're just on a plateau. And if you do too much of masculinity, you're going to be less happy. And this is why there is the coefficient on violation for men is not statistically significant, because for that it's not linear. And it's interesting. It shows that for men, there is a very precise descriptive norm of what they do and what they should do. It's here. If they do less of that, they're unhappy. If they do too much, it's not good either. Okay, so we have here the estimates confirm this idea of asymmetry. So for men, violation is penalized. For women, violation is rewarded. So our interpretation is that gender norms are vertical, and typically men behavior and traits are associated, we cannot talk about causality, associated with higher utility, measured by life satisfaction. This I already told you. Okay, then your question. So what are these traits and behaviors? So we divide these different gender markers into different domains. So the labor markets, political attitudes, personality, and social behavior. These are the domains where there is this asymmetry. So higher life satisfaction when you violate the female norm. For religion or health behavior, for instance, there is no asymmetry. And so this verticality in gender norms is more related with labor market and political attitudes, etc., these domains. Okay, so now you want to know more about the labor market. You want to know if everything is driven by money, because then it's not about norms. It is about norm, but it's all driven by money. So now we introduced additional controls in the estimates. So household income we have in the data. Marital status, I think it's it's not interesting, because if you're married, usually you're married with the opposite sex, but nonetheless, we test this. We inject in the data some measures that we take from other sources, the occupational prestige score, and the predicted individual income that we calculate using a Mincer equation using the EU SILC, so labor force surveys. What the result is that the main patterns persist with all these controls introduced separately, the magnitude is slightly reduced when controlling for income or occupational prestige score. So it looks like for women, part of the violation benefit comes from higher income, higher status, higher autonomy. And for men, part of the violation penalty comes from lower stages, etc. But even when you control for all this, the asymmetry remains.
Claudia, may I ask whether you had an educational domain? Because I saw political, labor market, etc., but I think there was no education, not in this slide, in the previous one.
Yeah, because we don't have the domain, the field of study.
Okay.
So we could control for education, which is going to be super correlated with income. But so education is part of the Mincer equation, but we don't have the field of study like.
Okay.
But what we do is we part of the. Okay, so I could show you that. Is there a no? I think I have all the domains, because among the labor market domains, there is the yeah, I should have written that. There is the share of women in your occupation. So how is it female dominated or man dominated? And this plays a large part. We'll talk about that. Okay, so these are the results. I think it's graphically it's easier. So separate regressions. The red or brown, I don't know, dots are the coefficients on the violation measure, and the yellow is the coefficient on the amplification measure. This is for women. So the coefficient on violation is always positive, even when you control for missings, household income, marital status, occupational prestige, predicted wages, having a child, migration status, community size. And for men, it's always also the same pattern. So the coefficient on violation is always negative in brown and mostly non-statistically significant for amplification. Okay, so we have a lot of robustness. Maybe so we can construct alternative constructions of typicality. I think it's all no. Okay, where is it? Yeah. So we can look at, for instance, the distance to the most gender polar references. So people who say, I'm 6 on femininity and 0 on masculinity. What are the typical traits and behaviors of these persons? And then the distance of me to these persons. We also use lasso selection instead of OLS for the gender marker selection. We use continuous scores of violation, etc., etc. So, but the results are the same. So yeah, you can see this here for women. We also select gender markers with a less stringent criteria, like if they are statistically significant at 5% or 10%. We can exclude also health markers, but the results are the same. For men also. Okay, then we can categorize life satisfaction differently. So we lose power. The R square become really smaller. For instance, you can standardize life satisfaction. You can binarize, cutting in below or above 5. But the patterns are the same. I mean, violation is always negative for men and positive for women. Amplification is always negative for women. Then we looked at age and we were disappointed. We were expecting that for younger respondents, under 40 maybe, the effects would be larger in magnitude, but actually it's not clear. The patterns are the same, negative coefficient for men, but not statistically significant for the young. For the young here, for men, there's nothing, and for women, amplification is negatively correlated. So the important thing in terms of patterns here is that we have this asymmetry. So that for women, there's going to be a negative sign on amplification or a positive sign on violation, and that for men, there would be a negative sign on violation. But you see, our expectations about the young are quite disappointed at this stage. They're not particularly progressive. And now the regional results, because there are some differences in terms of how people answer these femininity and masculinity questions. So you can see here it's for the sample of women, how feminine they feel. The darker red is more feminine, so you can see that there are differences in southern countries and Central and Eastern European countries. This feeling of femininity is more intense, much less so in Nordic countries here. And the same for feeling masculine if you are a man. The distribution by region also is quite talking. What is obvious here is the difference between Nordic countries here and here and the other countries, essentially. So in Nordic countries, the subjective identity is much more mixed. So there is much more overlap in terms of how feminine and how masculine people feel, no matter whether they are a man or woman. You see the violin part here is much bigger than elsewhere, like in the south of Europe or in the west or even in Central Eastern Europe. The share of people who feel very feminine in the north or very masculine in the north is really very low compared with, if you remember the average one. For instance, compared with the western, which is here. Not at all the same distribution. Okay, so I'll skip that. So now, okay, heterogeneity. So not heterogeneity. So now we do the same exercise from the start, subsample by subsample. So the first column recalls what we had before. So for instance, this is men. So these are the results that we know. And then we run the same exercise of identifying the gender norms that are relevant in Nordic countries, calculating the typical Nordic man or Nordic woman, and then the typical distance of each Nordic respondent vis-a-vis the average Nordic man or woman. And so what we see here is that feeling masculine for men here it's much less important in Nordic countries. So the correlation between feeling masculine and happiness is smaller in Nordic countries than in average in Europe. It's much higher in Central and Eastern Europe. And then we have the pattern is the same in terms of the violation and amplification. Violation is negative when it's statistically significant. It's negative. And for women, the feeling feminine again is much less important for Nordic women here, 0.10, than in average in Europe, 0.22, and in the Central and Eastern European countries, 0.30. So it's not only that people have a higher sense of femininity or masculinity, it's also that it's much more important because it's much more correlated with life satisfaction. And then the patterns, again, amplification is always negative in all regions.
Yeah, the question indeed, because when you also showed the figure before, I was wondering whether this difference is really reflect difference on how feminine or how masculine you feel, or how accepted it is, to kind of violate your gender norm, right? So, for example, if you are a man in Italy, maybe you feel it's less accepted to say that you feel feminine than in the Nordic countries, and this is, reflected in the answers to this question.
So it would be like a differential item functioning. You mean that people would answer differently, or no? It's really about the correlation between feeling feminine and life satisfaction.
Yeah, I guess that when they say that they feel so I mean that there is also some kind of the way they answer this question. Yeah, that they maybe they don't think that they can say that they feel feminine or masculine. I mean, there is a different.
Maybe there would be this differential item functioning, but we see here that the correlation for southern countries, for instance, is higher than in Western or in the North. So they're really less than in the Central European countries, but still. So I'm early in the presentation, no, not so much. This regional heterogeneity gives some support to the fact that this feeling feminine, feeling masculine, being happy and conforming to the norms is not completely driven by an omitted variable. Because you could say it's not an experiment, we don't have an instrument, you don't know why people do behave in an amplifying or violating way, why they feel feminine or masculine. So maybe it's all driven by hormones. Maybe it could be that masculine hormones make you feel happier, make you I don't know, do some things, but it's not because you do that thing that you feel happier, or it's not because you're happier that you do that thing. But here, the fact that there are some regional differences shows that unless there are regional differences in hormones, if this is the omitted variable, it's not completely due to an omitted variable, I think, maybe. Hopefully. So the moral of the paper is that there is some support for an identity-based utility model, because obviously subjective perception of your own gender adds to the understanding of life satisfaction, so utility. Conformity or violation of the descriptive here, gender norms, are also correlated with this measure of utility, but there is a trade-off between norm conformity and norm contents. There is some verticality of gender-based differentiation in terms of traits and behavior. So of course, I'm not saying that always and ever it will be the case that women need to do what men do. This is what's going to make them happier. This is the case in our societies, yes. So the answer to my initial question, is it nice for girls to do math? I think the answer is yes, in the societies as they are, as the way they are organized, what is valued in society, who earns more depending on what occupation you do. But society could be organized differently. The structure of payoffs could be different. But in Europe, as we see it in the data, this is what we see. I want to say that, just quote some papers which are very resonating with ours. So this is a recent CPR working paper by Dean, Exley, Klinowski, Niederle, and Sarson. And I really like the title because it illustrates exactly the non-parametric graph that I showed you. So it's entitled Gender Views, a Restricted Path for Men and a Mission Impossible for Women. So what they do is they run a big survey online using Prolific among, I guess, an American sample, asking, do you think that society would praise a man who would do this or that, who would behave in an aggressive way, dominant, etc., etc.? So a series of traits. And to another part of the sample, they ask, do you think that people would criticize a man if he behaved in a certain ways? And they ask the same questions about women. So do you think a woman would be praised if she did this or that? Or would you think a woman would be criticized if she behaved in a compassionate or aggressive or dominant? And what they find is that for men, it's very simple, it's very clear. Everybody agrees on what types of behaviors and traits would be praised for a man and what types of behaviors and traits would be criticized for men. But nobody agrees, there's no agreement about what types of behaviors and traits would be praised for women or criticized. So, for each trait or behaviors, some people say she would be praised, some people say she would be criticized. So we don't know what to do. So this is hence the title, Mission Impossible for Women. There is no clear script. But this really goes back to this graph, if you remember. So for men, it's really, you know what we should do, then there is a small plateau, and if you go too much on the right or on the left side, you're going to be penalized. Very restricted path for men. There is another paper, and then I will stop. No, not this one, but this one. Paper by Banan, Santa Virta, and Sarzosa, sorry. So this is a paper that started a long time ago. They ran a survey among Swedish kids who were 13 years old in 1966. 10,000 kids in Sweden. And they asked them about what they did, so what they liked to play, the toys, their habits, activities, who were their friends, their preferences, etc. And then they categorized the types, the preferences of these kids in terms of how feminine, typically feminine or typically masculine they were. So this was really following some stereotypes of that time. So it was about playing football, constructing things, knitting for women. I mean, it's very, very stereotypical, but it was back in 1966. And then they follow these guys for I don't know, 50 years, and they look at what these kids become. So they create an index of gender typicality, and they look at the correlation between the gender typicality of each kid and the much later outcomes. And what they find is that childhood gender nonconformity is associated with better life outcomes for women in terms of having a job, how much you earn, are you married, do you have kids, how is your mental health, are you depressed or what, and much worse life outcomes for men compared with the gender typical. So for men, being already gender atypical in their childhood was going to be associated much long afterwards with worse outcomes. But for women, exactly like in our paper, it was a very good predictor of their future outcomes. So this is exactly the same conclusion. So of course, we acknowledge it's a cross-section. There is no causality. We measure descriptive norms. We don't know what people have in mind. We don't have the prescriptive norms. And we don't know exactly what people have in mind when they answer these questions. How feminine do you feel? How masculine do you feel? Maybe they have these stereotypes in mind, but maybe there's completely something else. And so now we're running a survey online where we ask people what they have in mind. So when you answer this question, what were the first words that came to your mind? So we're going to know what is on people's mind when they answer. So there are 3 waves. We already have the data. We just looked at the first wave of data collection, and we see that a lot of the answers are related with physical appearance, and then some traits, personality traits. But we did not start really analyzing the data in depth, so we'll know. And maybe I'll stop here. Time for a question.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question, I think.
Yeah, may I?
Daphne, yeah.
Claudia, thanks very much. I really enjoyed this. I wanted to ask whether you think the differences across regions, so between the north and the south of Europe, could be mirroring this occupational gender segregation, which is very high in the north, but it's contrary to at least my expectations, very much lower in the south. So in the South, because you are together with men at work, you need to look more feminine, or you need to feel more feminine. Whereas in the North, everybody at work, there's all men or there's all women. So you don't really need to feel masculine.
Yes. So we looked at, I thought I had put it in the presentation, but we just did this recently. We added that to the paper. We looked at when we do the analysis region by region, we look at the gender markers. And it's true, you're right. In the North, so we look at what are the two most important gender markers for each domain. And in the North, the most important gender marker is that women work in the public sector and men work in the private sector. This is much more, I mean, this is usual, but this is very much more important as a differentiating factor in Nordic countries and in than in the rest of Europe. So maybe it's not exactly, so first of all, it's not exactly the same gender markers. And then what you say, it goes back to something that Thomas Breda has written, that in countries where the outcomes are much more equal. So it doesn't really matter if you do this occupation or that, and also there is a lot of income redistribution. So you have more freedom in choosing what you want to do and following your own tastes. And this is why sometimes it creates even more gender gap in math, for instance, in these countries where there is more equality between men and women than in countries where there is less, for instance, in the Middle East, where women really need to do math and science if they want to be autonomous. So you're right. You're right. So this shows that it's not necessarily doing math or doing what men do that makes people happy. It's really doing this in a society where this is rewarded. And in a society like Nordic countries, maybe, where the reward is much less differentiated, then violating the typical female norm is not going to bring so much utility. So you're completely right. We should add this to the paper. We're writing a second version. Oh, no, we're just revising the paper, rewriting. We're writing all the time this paper for 2 years.
Yeah, I also have a quick question. So because there is this thing, because now what you said, that indeed you would like to know what people have in mind. I think, could it be that people feel more masculine or feminine in different domains? So for example, if you would talk about physical appearance, somebody can feel very feminine, but a woman can feel very feminine, but at work, feels more masculine. So could it be that how feminine or masculine you feel depends a bit on the domain, and this then has an impact on
Exactly,
your happiness?
Very interesting. Yeah, this is a very good point. Maybe people will say, if I were a woman, I feel very feminine because I look like a Barbie. So I'm a 5 on the 0-6 scale but I'm a 3 on the masculinity scale because I'm autonomous. I don't know, I'm a CEO or I'm a lawyer or what. So we'll know exactly, for each gender, what makes them feel feminine or masculine and what are the domains. So maybe indeed, so it looks like appearance is important for men and women. That's shared. But then we will look at the labor market domain. We'll see if this is what makes people feel more on the other side.
What I also noticed is that basically the subjective question, right, that was positively related, but the other question is not a subjective question, but you take it, what happens with other people. And given that the question is subjective, it is also possible that it in fact correlates with the same things for men and women. So what you mentioned about physical appearance, suppose that I'm quite fit. Now, then for both a man and a woman, that can correlate positively with, right? So if you're very obese, you might not feel so feminine, or if you're very obese, you might not feel so masculine, because you associate a more, slender figure with both. But then they, of course, look differently in terms of figure, but in terms of sport or fitness and so on. So that then for both results in, well, for men, if I feel more masculine, I'm happier, but that's because I'm fitter, more sporty. And also for women, as a woman, I might feel more feminine, right? So for some of these things that you
but then it would not be a gender marker.
No, the subjective one, right? So that's the whole point. When you do the objective one, when you base it on how it correlates in the population, then it is more either male or female. But when you just ask me how, right? Yeah, or when you just ask me how feminine or how masculine you can feel, then it can in fact correlate the same way. That is my point. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so people may feel, so this is a question I wonder, because I know from another survey, a French one, that for instance, BMI is very much correlated with women's self-perception of femininity, not so much for men. But that's a question actually. Yeah, if being fit, if BMI, like small BMI, is positively correlated with a feeling of your own gender, then it will not be a gender marker, but it will be part of subjective femininity and masculinity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is my point precisely. That there is a difference between how you conceptually look at the subjective one, because you literally created the other one as well. It can be male or female or neither, but it can't be at the same time, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So we hope it's different.
Yeah.
We hope, I mean, I don't know. I mean, no, we don't hope, but we allow for these two variables, the constructed one and the self-reported one, to be based on different dimensions. Maybe it will be the same. Maybe in the end we'll find that what people have in mind is exactly the variables in the data. So okay, so then this variable will be useless. Or maybe we'll find that in this variable, in this subjective feeling of femininity or masculinity, there will be things that are not in the data set, and so it will be useful.
I have a question. Thanks, Claudia, for the great presentation. Do you know if the respondents are migrants or natives? So are you putting them all together?
Yeah,
Have you tried to look separately for migrants versus natives? Because, a lot of the discussions about, the North European versus the South European, stereotypes are probably not relevant for migrants. So I wonder if you exclude the migrants, do you find like stronger results? Or are they the same migrants versus native?
No, it's a very good idea. So we thought about that, but we did not want to manipulate the data because we wanted to say we take it as it is. We're completely agnostic. But it's true that we could. I think at some point we did control for migrant status, but we could do it without migrant status. I mean, first generation. I think we have first and second generation, so we could do without the migrants or with. If we take the subsample of migrants, we can try.
You might find like different, I mean, it depends, of course, where those migrants are from, right? But so that's probably complex to do it country by country. But, if those norms are internalized, passed from, generation to generation, there should be a stronger effect in the native, only if you look at the natives versus the migrants.
Yeah. So we thought about doing this epidemiological study. So looking at, just looking at countries of origin and then but then you have to compare these respondents with some norm. And we don't have the norm, or for instance, if they come from outside Europe, we will not have the norm, but we can see that, we could do like migrants from Middle East, Africa, or I don't know, Oceania,
I think you can just do migrants versus natives first and see what you get, and then just simple 1-0.
But this is a big question. I mean, what people have in mind in terms of norm. Is this just a local norm? You're in Italy, you want to be like the Italians, or do you have in mind, the way the world is, and you have internet, you watch movies. So the norm for women and for men is quite shared, worldwide, more or less. One more minute. Well, you can write to me if you have other questions. We're still writing the paper, so all comments will come.
But thank you so much for the very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it very much, also the second time. So it's really great. No,
Thank you.
really great paper. Thank you so much. A really important also topic. So thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you all at the next seminar next month.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.